Hello, my name is Julian, and I'm one of the developers over at Blue Triangle. I'm here today to tell you how to implement our new Android SDK into your existing or new Android Studio project. So, the first thing I'm going to do is start a new project. I'm going to do a basic activity. I'm going to name my project. Finish. Now that you have a new project started, you're going to want to set up your Gradle. So, first, you're going to want to modify the project Gradle to add a new repository to pull from. So we'll do that here. You're going to want to do it for all projects. The next thing you'll want to do is go to the app build Gradle. In the app Gradle, we'll add the implementation. The last thing you want to do is click sync. And that pulls in our new Android SDK. So the next thing I'm going to want to do is add a little bit of content to this application. So I'll add a interface. Next, I'm going to add another class. Interface. All this does is connect to the movie database. I send it the JSON query. It responds back with a JSON response, and it returns the response object. So the next step in setting up the SDK on your project is to initialize our library. And to do that, you'll go into the main activity of your application. You'll want to find your onCreate function and define a variable for the tracker that tracks all the timers that you're going to set up. As you can see, we're going to have to define the com.bluetriangle analytics tracker. Now that we've defined our tracker, we need to set it up. You set up your tracker on the onCreate method after the super. The site ID is your site ID the Blue Triangle assigns you when you sign up for an account. In this case, we're using a demo account. The next thing we're going to do, now that we have our tracker set up, is to implement a timer. The first thing we're going to want to time is the time between the first fragment and the second fragment. To do this, we'll go over to our first fragment. We'll import our timer. Now that we've imported our timer class, we can initialize our timer. We initialize our timer inside the click event of the button. So when you click the button to move from the first fragment to the second, we want to start our timer. The settings for the timer are page name and traffic segment. And if you're familiar with the portal, then you know that these are just categorizations for your data inside the portal. The page name corresponds to a page name like on a website. The traffic segment is different segments of traffic from that page. So now that we have our timer initialized, we're going to want to send it to our second fragment. We can do that using a bundle. Because the timer class implements the parsable interface, we can use the putParsable function of the bundle class. Now that we have the timer in a bundle, we can send the bundle to our second fragment. The next step is to grab the timer from the bundle in the second fragment. We'll go over to the second fragment and we'll import our timer class. Now that we've imported our timer class, we can create a variable for our timer. We'll want to create a public variable that can be accessible through the different methods of this fragment. Now that we have our timer initialized, we're going to want to use our timer and the onCreate method. To grab the timer from our first fragment, we're going to want to go to our onCreate and grab the timer from the bundle. As you can see, our bundle is called Save Instance State. We use the get parsable, and we use the key timer from the first fragment. So if we take a look at our first fragment, the key is timer. We need to make sure that our key matches timer here as well. Now that we've done that, the timers match, and we can sync our timers. We'll want to override the onStart method of our fragment. In the override of the onStart, we can set the timer interactive. The reason I choose to set our timer interactive here is because if you look at our application states, you can see that this is the state where our application becomes interactive. Here's a diagram. On create, on start. This is where your application starts to become interactive. And then on resume is when your application is fully active. So let's overwrite the on resume. In our on resume, we want to stop the timer because now our application is fully interactive. So the next thing we're going to do is put a timer between two activities. To do this, we'll add another activity. We'll just add a basic activity. Keep the defaults. Now that we have a new activity, we need a way to navigate over to our new activity. For this, we'll use the default button that was built into our project called Fab. That's located in the main activity. We'll locate its click event. Right now, the click event just shows a snack bar that says replace this with your own action. We fully intend to do that. The first thing that we want to do inside the click event is initialize a new timer. We don't want our page name to be the same as our other timer inside the first fragment. So let's change this to fragment next page. Then in our main activity, where we want to navigate to a new activity, we'll call this the activity next page for the page name. We also want to change our traffic segment name to Android Traffic 2. This will help us better differentiate in the portal the different data from the different page turns. We will then need to send this timer over to the second activity. We do this with intents. Because this intent is inside a click event, we need to use main activity this. We then have to tell the intent which activity to send the data to, which is main activity 2. We then need to tell the intent what data to pass. For this, we'll use the putExtra method. The last part is to actually navigate to the new activity. To navigate to the new activity, we'll use start activity and send it with the intent. Now that we're sending the timer over to our second activity, we'll grab the timer from in the second activity and stop the timer. First, we'll need to import our timer class. Next, we'll need a variable to define our timer for all the methods inside our activity. Last, inside the onCreate, we're going to want to grab our timer from the other activity. Now that we have our timer from the other activity, we can use this to time this activity. Just like our fragment, when we're traveling from this fragment to our second fragment, we can use the same onStart and onResume. The last type of timer is timing an asynchronous request. This is pretty straightforward. Here's an example of an asynchronous request that we added to this project early on. The first thing we're going to do is import our timer class. The next thing we're going to do is define our timer so that it's available globally inside our class. The next thing we're going to do is implement our timer. We'll call our page name asynchronous or async. We'll call this Android Traffic 3. The next thing we're going to want to do is stop the timer after the asynchronous request right before we return the JSON response. The last thing we do is build our project. So there was a minor error in the build. I forgot to define bundle for our second fragment so that we can actually get the timer from the first fragment. So we placed it in the bundle here, and then this is how you get the bundle from the second fragment. And I put a little bit of error handling this time to check and make sure that the bundle's not null and that our timer is actually getting set from the other timer. This will be our final build. Let's go ahead and test our fragment button. When you take a look at our run logs and see that the fragment was submitted successfully to Blue Triangle. This means that the data got picked up by our concentrators and will be displayed in the portal shortly. Let's test our activity button. We can take a look at the run logs again and see that the activity page was also submitted successfully. Thank you for listening to this tutorial. I hope it was helpful.